The sound of thunder rolled across the vast Montana prairie, but it wasn't from storm clouds gathering on the horizon. It was the pounding hooves of Preston Zane's stallion as he rode hard toward Wilson, a place he hardly recognized as home anymore. The year was 1867, and the country, like Preston himself, was still reeling from the aftermath of a war that had torn everything apart. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his left arm, a fresh wound from an encounter with a desperate highwayman 2 days back. It wasn't the worst injury he'd sustained, not by far. The deepest wounds weren't the ones that bled. They were carved into his soul, etched there by 3 years of seeing men torn apart by cannon fire, of killing to stay alive, of watching friends die in mud-soaked fields far from home. Preston had left Wilson, Montana, a bright-eyed young man of 22, full of patriotic fervor and romantic notions of glory. He returned at 25, his eyes hollow, his spirit fractured, his heart encased in ice. The war had changed him, hardened him in ways he couldn't even begin to explain to the folks waiting in Wilson, if anyone was still waiting at all. The town appeared on the horizon, nestled in the valley like it had been when he left. But Preston wasn't the same. His mother had died while he was away fighting. His father had written that much before the letters stopped coming altogether. Preston figured the old man had either passed on to or had given up on his son returning. As he approached the outskirts of Wilson, Preston slowed his horse to a walk. The animal was exhausted, foam flecking its dark coat. Preston patted its neck absently, his eyes scanning the familiar buildings that seemed somehow smaller than in his memory. "Whoa there, Eclipse," he murmured, the first words he'd spoken aloud in days. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rusty from disuse. The main street was alive with afternoon activity wagons rolling by, women in calico dresses moving between shops, men gathered outside the saloon. Preston felt exposed, vulnerable. Every face that turned toward him sent a jolt of anxiety through his system. Back east, in the thick of battle, he'd learned that attention could mean death. He dismounted outside the general store, tying Eclipse to the hitching post. His legs felt unsteady beneath him. 3 weeks in the saddle had taken its toll, but it was more than that. It was the weight of coming back to a place that held memories of a man he no longer was. The bell above the door jingled as Preston pushed it open, and he flinched at the sound. Inside, the store smelled of coffee, leather, and dried goods. A woman stood behind the counter, her back to him as she arranged items on a shelf. "Be with you in just a moment," she called over her shoulder, her voice clear and melodic. Preston didn't respond, just stood silently, taking in the familiar surroundings. His eyes drifted to a poster on the wall, a wanted notice for a gang that had been robbing stages between Wilson and Helena. The woman turned, and Preston felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath his feet. "Lily," the name escaped his lips before he could stop it. Lily Keller's eyes widened in shock, her hands freezing in midair, still holding a tin of tobacco. "Preston Zane," she whispered, and it wasn't a question. They had grown up together, had been sweethearts before he'd gone to war. He had written to her every week for the first year. Then the letters had become sporadic as the fighting intensified, as the horrors mounted. Eventually, he'd stopped writing altogether. It seemed cruel to share the darkness that had consumed him, and impossible to pretend it hadn't. You're back," she said, setting down the tin with trembling hands. Preston nodded stiffly, unsure what to say. He hadn't expected to find Lily here. Last he'd heard, she was engaged to the banker's son, your father. "She began, dead?" Preston asked flatly. Lily shook her head quickly. "No, but not well. He's been asking for you." A flicker of something not quite relief, but perhaps the absence of fresh grief passed through Preston. He nodded again, his eyes dropping to the worn floorboards. "Are you hurt?" Lily asked, moving around the counter. Her gaze had fallen to the blood-stained bandage on his arm. "It's nothing," he replied, taking a step back. Lily stopped, sensing his withdrawal. She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to the brokenness inside him, and Preston couldn't bear it. He turned to go. "Preston," she called after him, her voice soft but firm. "Your father's at the old place. Dr. Michaels sees to him twice a week." Preston paused at the door, his back to her. Thank you, he managed to say, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Preston untied Eclipse and led the horse down the street toward the livery stable. He needed to see to his mount before doing anything else. The animal had carried him faithfully across half the country. It deserved care before Preston faced whatever awaited him at the old family ranch. The liveryman, Tom Bradley, recognized Preston immediately despite the changes in his appearance. "Preston Zane, as I live and breathe," the older man exclaimed, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached. "Folks said you might not be coming back." "Nearly didn't," Preston replied curtly. Tom's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Well, I'll take good care of your horse. Fine animal." "He's seen me through a lot," Preston said, running a hand along Eclipse's neck. "He needs grain and a good rub-down. Consider it done," Tom assured him. "Your pa will be mighty glad to see you." Preston handed over the reins without further comment. He collected his saddlebags and rifle, slinging them over his shoulder. The weight was familiar, comforting in a way that human interaction no longer was. The walk to the edge of town where the Zane property began gave Preston time to steel himself. The ranch house came into view, a modest two-story structure that had always seemed like a palace to him as a boy. Now, it looked neglected. The white paint was peeling, the front porch sagging slightly at one corner. A dog barked somewhere out of sight, and then a wizened old man appeared on the porch, shotgun in hand. "State your business," he called out, his voice quavering with age but still carrying the authority Preston remembered. "It's me, Pa," Preston called back, stopping a respectful distance from the house. The shotgun lowered slowly. "Preston, that really you, boy?" "Yes, sir." Jeremiah Zane squinted, then set the shotgun aside, leaning it against the porch rail. He made his way down the steps with careful, measured movements. Up close, Preston could see how much the war years had aged his father. Jeremiah's once robust frame was gaunt, his face deeply lined, his hair completely white now. "You look like hell, son," Jeremiah said, stopping a few feet away. A humorless smile tugged at Preston's mouth. "Feel like it too." They stood there awkwardly, father and son, separated by more than the few feet of dusty yard between them. Then, surprisingly, Jeremiah stepped forward and embraced Preston in a rough hug. Preston stiffened, then slowly, reluctantly returned the gesture. "Your mother would have been glad you made it back," Jeremiah said, releasing him. "Come inside, you must be hungry." The interior of the house was dim and musty. It was clear Jeremiah had been living alone for some time, managing only the barest necessities. Dishes were piled in the kitchen sink, and dust covered most surfaces. Preston set his things down by the door, his eyes scanning the familiar room that now felt like a relic from someone else's life. "Sit," Jeremiah instructed, gesturing to the kitchen table. "I've got some stew I can heat up." Preston obeyed, watching as his father moved stiffly around the kitchen, stoking the stove and placing a pot on the heat. "How bad is it?" Preston asked, nodding toward his father's obvious limp. Jeremiah shrugged. "Bad enough. Rheumatism, mostly. Doc says it ain't killing me, just making me wish it would some days." He glanced over at Preston. "Your arm?" "Highwayman, 2 days back. Bullet just grazed me." Jeremiah nodded, accepting this information without further inquiry. They had always been men of few words, but now the silence between them was filled with unspoken questions, with grief and change and the weight of all that had happened in the years apart. As they ate, the reheated stew bland but filling Jeremiah filled Preston in on the changes in Wilson. The railroad was coming through next year. The cattle business was booming with the demands of eastern cities. The bank had foreclosed on the Hendersons' place. Widow Jenkins had remarried a man from California. Preston listened, offering nothing in return. What could he say? That he'd killed more men than he could count. That he still woke in the night hearing the screams of dying soldiers. That he didn't know how to live in this world of peace when war was all that remained real to him. "The Keller girl never married, you know," Jeremiah said casually, watching Preston over his coffee cup. "Everyone thought she would. Had offers from half the eligible men in the county after you left. Even that fancy banker's son from Helena was sweet on her." Preston's hand tightened on his spoon. "She's running the general store now. Her pa died last winter. Influenza. She took over the business, does a fine job of it from what I hear. Preston nodded, pushing away his half-eaten stew. I need to wash up, he said, rising abruptly from the table. Later, clean-shaven and dressed in fresh clothes he'd found in his old room left untouched, since his departure, Preston sat on the front porch watching the sunset. It painted the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, the beauty of it almost painful to behold after so much ugliness. You planning to stay? Jeremiah asked, settling heavily into the chair beside Preston's. Don't know, Preston answered honestly. Don't know if I can. Jeremiah nodded slowly. Ranch needs work. I haven't been able to keep up with it. Had to sell off most of the cattle. Just kept a few head and the horses. I noticed. Could use the help if you're of a mind to give it. Preston turned to look at his father, really seeing him for the first time since his return. The proud, strong man who had raised him was fading, worn down by age and hardship and loneliness. I'll stay for a while, Preston said finally. See what needs doing. It wasn't a commitment, but it was something. A starting point. The next morning, Preston rose before dawn, a habit ingrained by military life. He moved through the quiet house, starting coffee and slipping outside to check on the livestock. The barn was in better shape than the house, but still showing signs of neglect. The handful of cattle in the nearest pasture looked healthy enough, though, and the horses nickered softly as he entered the stable. By the time Jeremiah emerged from the house, Preston had already mucked out the stalls and was repairing a broken section of fence. Forgot what it was like having a young man around, Jeremiah commented, watching Preston work. Preston didn't respond, focused on hammering a nail into place. I'm heading into town for supplies, Jeremiah continued. Need anything? Preston shook his head, then reconsidered. Actually, could use some new work gloves. These are worn through. He held up his hands, showing the tattered leather. I'll see to it, Jeremiah promised. After his father left, Preston continued working methodically, losing himself in the physical labor. It was easier than thinking, than remembering. The ranch was smaller than he remembered, or perhaps it just seemed that way because so much of it had gone to seed. Fields that had once grown hay were now overrun with weeds. Fences sagged in places, and the windmill that pumped water from the well creaked ominously in the morning breeze. Preston was halfway up the windmill, attempting to assess what repairs it needed, when he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. His body tensed instantly, hand reaching automatically for a weapon that wasn't there. He forced himself to breathe, to remember where he was. Not in enemy territory, not at war. A rider came into view, a woman on a chestnut mare. Even from a distance, Preston recognized Lily's straight-backed posture, the way she handled her horse with easy confidence. He considered climbing down, disappearing into the barn before she reached the house, but something kept him rooted in place, watching her approach. Lily dismounted gracefully, tying her horse to the hitching post. She carried a package wrapped in brown paper. Looking around the yard, she finally spotted Preston atop the windmill and raised a hand in greeting. Your father said you might need these, she called, holding up the package. Preston had no choice but to descend. He climbed down carefully, suddenly conscious of his sweat-soaked shirt and the dirt smudged across his face and hands. You didn't have to bring them yourself, he said as he approached, keeping a careful distance between them. I wanted to, Lily replied simply. She handed him the package. Work gloves as requested, and I added a few other things, salve for that arm wound, some coffee beans and a loaf of fresh bread. Your father mentioned you're living on what he calls cooking. Despite himself, Preston felt the ghost of a smile tug at his lips. His specialty is burnt beans and tough biscuits. Some things never change, Lily said, a warm smile lighting her face. Your mother used to say he could burn water if left unsupervised. The mention of his mother sent a pang through Preston. Thank you for the supplies, he said stiffly, tucking the package under his arm. Lily regarded him steadily, undeterred by his coldness. How are you finding Wilson after all this time? Different, the same, Preston shrugged. I haven't been to town much. You've been back almost a week, and this is only the second time I've seen you. There was no accusation in her tone, just observation. Been busy here, Preston gestured vaguely at the ranch. Place needs a lot of work. Lily nodded, her eyes taking in the state of the property. Your father did his best, but after your mother passed. She trailed off. It was hard on him. Preston looked away, unable to bear the sympathy in her eyes. I should get back to work, he said, of course. Lily turned to her horse but paused before mounting. There's a social at the church on Sunday. Your father usually attends. You'd be welcome too. Preston shook his head immediately. I don't think, just consider it, Lily interrupted gently. People would like to see you, welcome you home. This isn't home anymore, Preston said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Lily's expression softened. Then where is? She asked quietly. Preston had no answer. He watched as she mounted her horse and rode away, feeling as though she'd taken something with her, some small warmth that had briefly kindled in his chest during their conversation. The days fell into a pattern. Preston rose early, worked until exhaustion threatened to overtake him, then fell into bed for a few hours of restless sleep plagued by nightmares. He spoke little to his father, though they shared meals and occasionally worked side by side. The physical labor was therapeutic in its way, allowing Preston to focus on immediate problems rather than the chaos in his mind. By the end of the first week, he'd repaired the windmill, mended most of the fences, and begun clearing the overgrown fields. His body, already lean and hard from war and the long journey home, grew stronger. The wound on his arm healed, leaving yet another scar to join the collection that mapped his body like a testament to survival. Sunday came, and with it, Jeremiah's preparations for the church social. Preston watched silently as his father polished his boots, trimmed his beard, and put on his good suit, slightly threadbare at the elbows but still respectable. Last chance to change your mind, Jeremiah offered as he prepared to leave. Preston shook his head. Not today. Something like disappointment flickered across Jeremiah's face, but he nodded. Suit yourself, don't wait up. Alone in the house, Preston felt restless. He paced the rooms like a caged animal, eventually grabbing his hat and heading for the barn. He saddled Eclipse, now rested and restored after his long journey, and rode out across the property. The land stretched before him, bathed in late afternoon sunlight. He rode to the far boundary where the Zane property met the foothills, then followed the creek that wound its way back toward the house. It was here, by this same creek, that he and Lily had shared their first kiss at 16. Where he'd promised to marry her when they were old enough, before the war had intervened and rewritten all their futures. The memory came unbidden, unwelcome. Preston pushed it away, urging Eclipse into a gallop as if he could outrun his own thoughts. But memories, like ghosts, couldn't be escaped so easily. When he returned to the ranch, the sun was setting. To his surprise, a wagon was parked outside the house. Preston approached cautiously, relaxing slightly when he recognized it as belonging to Dr. Michaels. Inside, he found the elderly doctor examining his father, who was seated in his chair by the fireplace, looking pale. What happened? Preston demanded. Dr. Michaels glanced up. Ah, Preston, nothing to be alarmed about. Your father had a spell of dizziness at the social. Mrs. Jenkins was kind enough to bring him home. Preston looked to the kitchen where an older woman, the widow Jenkins, he presumed, though now remarried, was preparing tea. Is he all right? Preston asked, lowering his voice. He will be, Dr. Michaels assured him, packing away his stethoscope. His heart isn't as strong as it once was. He needs rest, good food, and less strain. The doctor gave Preston a meaningful look. Having you home to help with the ranch is a blessing, whether he'll admit it or not. Preston nodded stiffly. I'll see he rests. After the doctor and Mrs. Jenkins departed, Preston helped his father to bed, surprised at how light the older man felt as he supported him up the stairs. Don't need fussing over, Jeremiah grumbled, though he lacked the strength to resist Preston's assistance. Humor me, Preston replied, easing his father onto the bed and helping him remove his boots. Jeremiah sighed, settling back against the pillows. Lily asked after you, seemed disappointed you weren't there. Preston made no reply, busying himself with arranging the blankets. She's a good woman, Preston, Jeremiah continued. Strong, kind, she waited for you, never said so outright, but everyone knew. That was her choice, Preston said, his voice hard. I never asked her to wait. No, you didn't, Jeremiah agreed. You just rode off to war and left everyone who cared about you to wonder if you were alive or dead, then when you stopped writing." He shook his head. "What happened out there, son?" Preston turned away, moving toward the door. "Get some rest, Pa, Preston," Jeremiah called after him. "Whatever happened, whatever you did or saw, it doesn't change who you are at heart." Preston paused in the doorway, his shoulders tense. "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "It changed everything." The next morning, Preston was in town before the sun had fully risen. His father's episode had shaken him more than he cared to admit, and Dr. Michael's words about proper care weighed heavily on his mind. The general store wouldn't open for hours yet, but Preston knew Lily arrived early to receive deliveries and prepare for the day. He hesitated outside the store, then moved around to the back entrance. As expected, a lamp glowed in the storeroom. Preston knocked softly. Lily appeared in the doorway, surprise evident on her face. "Preston, is everything all right? My father had a spell yesterday." "At the social," Preston explained. "Dr. Michaels says he needs proper food, rest. I thought I could use some supplies, things to make decent meals." Understanding dawned in Lily's eyes. "Of course, come in." The storeroom was neat and organized, shelves stocked with goods of all kinds. Lily led Preston into the main store, lighting additional lamps as she went. "How is Jeremiah this morning?" she asked, moving behind the counter. "Sleeping still. Seems steady enough." Preston shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know much about cooking." A small smile touched Lily's lips. "What did you eat during the war?" "Whatever they gave us. Hardtack, salt pork, coffee so weak you could see through it." Preston shrugged. "After, on the way home, whatever I could hunt or buy." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Let me put together some things that will be simple to prepare. Nourishing, too." She began moving around the store, selecting items and placing them on the counter. Preston watched her, struck by how gracefully she moved, how efficiently she worked. The Lily he remembered had been a girl pretty, spirited, with a laugh that could light up a room. This Lily was a woman, composed and capable, with a quiet strength that commanded respect. "Your father mentioned you've been working hard on the ranch," Lily commented as she added a bag of beans to the growing pile. "It needed attention," Preston said simply. "It's good of you to help him." Lily glanced up. "Will you be staying in Wilson then?" The question caught Preston off guard. "I haven't decided," he admitted. Lily nodded, accepting this without pressing further. "These should last you a while," she said, indicating the supplies. "I've included a few simple recipes my mother wrote down years ago. Nothing complicated." "Thank you," Preston said, reaching for his wallet. "What do I owe you?" Lily named a fair price, and Preston counted out the money. As he did so, she wrapped everything in brown paper and string, creating manageable bundles. "If you need anything else, you know where to find me," Lily said as she helped him load the packages onto his horse. Their hands brushed as they worked, and Preston felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. He pulled away quickly, securing the last bundle to his saddle. "I should get back," he said, not meeting her eyes. Lily took a step back. "Give my regards to your father. Tell him I hope he's feeling better soon." Preston nodded, mounting his horse. He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Lily, for the help." "That's what neighbors do," she replied softly. As Preston rode back to the ranch, he found himself thinking of Lily's hands, still soft despite her work, but capable and sure. How different from his own, calloused and rough, stained with soil now instead of blood, but no less marked by the life he'd led. Over the next few weeks, Preston fell into a new routine. Caring for his ailing father added another dimension to his days. Jeremiah resisted at first, insisting he didn't need looking after, but his strength was clearly waning. Preston learned to cook simple meals using Lily's recipes, discovered which tasks his father could still manage and which were beyond him now, and gradually took over the running of what remained of the ranch. To his surprise, he found a measure of peace in the structured days. The nightmares didn't stop, but they came less frequently. Sometimes he could go hours without thinking of the war, without hearing phantom gunfire or smelling smoke and blood. Jeremiah, too, seemed to improve with proper care and companionship, though he remained frailer than Preston had ever seen him. They began to talk more over evening meals, not about the war or Preston's experiences, but about the ranch, about Wilson. about mundane matters that somehow helped anchor Preston to the present. "You should go to town tomorrow," Jeremiah said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Get some proper socialization. You've been hiding out here for nearly a month." "I'm not hiding," Preston objected. "I'm working," Jeremiah snorted. "Call it what you like. A man needs more than work and sleep to live a life worth having." Preston said nothing, staring out at the darkening landscape. "I need more coffee anyway," Jeremiah added casually. "And sugar." "Fine," Preston conceded. "I'll go to town tomorrow." The next day, Preston found himself outside the general store once again, this time during regular business hours. The store was busy, several women examining fabrics while a man at the counter purchased ammunition. Preston lingered outside, reluctant to enter the crowded space. Crowds made him uneasy now, too many people, too much movement, too many potential threats. He waited until the store had emptied somewhat before entering. The bell above the door announced his arrival, and Lily looked up from where she was measuring fabric for an elderly woman. "Preston," she said, a smile warming her face. "It's good to see you." Preston nodded in greeting, moving to examine a shelf of canned goods while Lily finished with her customer. He was aware of curious glances from the remaining patrons. Wilson was a small town, and his return had not gone unnoticed, despite his reclusiveness. When Lily was free, Preston approached the counter with his modest list of supplies. "How is your father?" Lily asked as she gathered the items. "Better," Preston replied. "Still weak, but improving." "I'm glad to hear it." Lily paused, then added, "And how are you finding life back in Wilson?" Preston considered the question. "Quiet," he said finally. "Which isn't a bad thing." Lily smiled at that. "No, I suppose it isn't." She finished assembling his order, then hesitated. "Preston, there's a harvest dance next weekend. It's nothing fancy, just a gathering at the Thompson barn." "Music, food, would you consider coming?" Preston's instinct was to refuse immediately. The thought of a crowded barn, noise, expectations of sociability, it made his chest tighten with anxiety. "I don't dance anymore," he said stiffly. "You don't have to dance," Lily assured him. "Just be there. People have been asking about you. They'd like to welcome you home properly." "Why?" Preston asked bluntly. "Why should they care? I've been gone for years. I'm practically a stranger." "Because that's what community means," Lily replied simply. "Especially out here, we look after our own." "I'm not sure I am one of your own anymore," Preston admitted, the words coming out more honestly than he'd intended. Lily's expression softened. "You are to me," she said quietly. The simple declaration caught Preston off guard. He really looked at her for the first time since his return. Her eyes were the same clear blue he remembered, though perhaps with more wisdom in their depths now. A few strands of her honey-blonde hair had escaped her practical bun, framing her face. There was a smudge of flour on her cheek, probably from baking that morning. Without thinking, Preston reached out and brushed it away with his thumb. Lily went still under his touch, her eyes widening slightly. Preston pulled his hand back as if burned. "Flour," he explained awkwardly, wiping his thumb on his trousers. Lily touched her cheek where his fingers had been. "Thank you," she murmured. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Preston cleared his throat. "I should get these back to the ranch," he said, gathering his purchases. "Think about the dance," Lily called as he headed for the door. "Saturday next. Starts at sundown." Preston didn't promise anything, but he found himself thinking about the invitation as he rode home. The thought of facing so many people at once was daunting. And yet, something in Lily's expression, in the way she'd said, "You are to me," tugged at him, awakening feelings he'd thought dead and buried on distant battlefields. The week passed in a blur of work and routine. Preston mentioned the dance to his father, who predictably encouraged him to attend. "Take the wagon," Jeremiah insisted, "and wear your good shirt. The blue one brings out your eyes." Preston rolled his eyes at this, but on Saturday evening he found himself doing exactly as his father suggested. He bathed thoroughly, shaved with extra care, and put on the blue shirt and his least worn pair of trousers. He even polished his boots until they gleamed. "You'll do," Jeremiah said approvingly as Preston prepared to leave. "Now remember, be polite, dance at least once. And for God's sake, try to smile occasionally. You look like you're facing a firing squad instead of a barn dance." I make no promises, Preston replied, but there was a hint of humor in his voice that had been absent for too long. The Thompson barn was lit up like a beacon as Preston approached, lanterns hanging from every available surface. Wagons and horses surrounded the building, and the sound of fiddle music and laughter spilled out into the night. Preston sat in the wagon for several long moments, fighting the urge to turn around and head back to the ranch. Courage comes in many forms, son, his father had told him once, long before the war. Sometimes it's charging into battle. Sometimes it's just showing up when it would be easier to stay away. Drawing a deep breath, Preston climbed down from the wagon and made his way toward the barn. Inside, it was warm and bright and crowded. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small band of local musicians played at the far end. The center of the barn had been cleared for dancing, and several couples were already swinging to a lively tune. Preston kept to the edges of the gathering, nodding greetings to those who recognized him but avoiding lengthy conversations. He accepted a plate of food from Mrs. Thompson and found a relatively quiet corner to eat, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted Lily almost immediately. She was hard to miss in a simple but pretty dress of deep green, her hair loosely pinned up with tendrils framing her face. She was laughing at something the blacksmith's son had said, her head tilted back, her expression carefree. Something twisted in Preston's chest at the sight, not quite jealousy, but a sharp awareness of all he had missed, all that had gone on without him while he was away fighting a war that now seemed distant and purposeless. As if sensing his gaze, Lily looked up, her eyes finding his across the crowded barn. Her smile softened, became something meant just for him. She excused herself from her companions and made her way toward him. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. Preston shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "My father insisted, said I'd forgotten how to be around people." "And has it been terrible so far?" Lily asked, a teasing light in her eyes. "Not as bad as I expected," Preston admitted. He glanced around the barn. "It's a good turnout." "Best harvest in 3 years," Lily explained. "Everyone's in the mood to celebrate." They stood in somewhat awkward silence for a moment, the music and chatter flowing around them. "Would you like to dance?" Lily asked finally. Preston stiffened. "I told you I don't dance anymore." "I remember," Lily finished for him, "but I thought perhaps you might make an exception. Just one dance." The look in her eyes was one Preston remembered from their youth, a mix of challenge and hope that had always been hard to resist. But he wasn't that young man anymore, eager to impress, confident in his own skin. "I can't, Lily," he said quietly. "I'm not. I don't know how to be that person anymore." Instead of the disappointment he expected, understanding dawned in Lily's eyes. "Then walk with me instead," she suggested. "It's a beautiful night." Preston hesitated, then nodded. He followed Lily out of the barn into the cool evening air. They walked in silence toward a stand of trees at the edge of the Thompson property, the music fading behind them. "I used to imagine you coming home," Lily said abruptly. "After your letters stopped coming, I would picture it 1,000 different ways. Sometimes you'd ride in like a conquering hero. Sometimes you'd appear on my doorstep in the middle of the night, but in every version you were whole and unharmed and unchanged." Preston said nothing, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. "It was foolish," Lily continued, her voice soft in the darkness. "No one comes back from war unchanged. My father fought in Mexico. He was never the same after, though I was too young to know him before." "What do you want from me, Lily?" Preston asked, the question blunt but not unkind. Lily stopped walking, turning to face him in the moonlight. "Nothing you're not ready to give," she answered simply. "Friendship for now, the rest, time will tell. And if time tells you I'm not worth the wait." Preston challenged. "If I'm too broken to be fixed—" "You're not something to be fixed, Preston," Lily said firmly. "You're someone who survived, who endured. There's strength in that, not weakness." Preston looked away, unable to bear the sincerity in her gaze. "You don't know the things I've done, the man I've become." "Then tell me," Lily urged. "Not all at once, not tonight, but someday when you're ready." A bitter laugh escaped Preston. "And if you don't like what you hear—" "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Lily said. She reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and took his hand in hers. "You're still worth knowing, Preston Zane, still worth." She hesitated, then finished softly, still worth loving. Preston looked down at their joined hands, hers small but strong, his larger, calloused, bearing the scars of war and hard work. He should pull away. Should walk back to the wagon and drive home and spare her the disappointment of discovering just how damaged he truly was. Instead, his fingers tightened around hers. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by that simple touch, the sounds of the celebration a distant backdrop to the quiet understanding growing between them. "I should get you back," Preston said finally. "Before people talk." Lily smiled. "They'll talk anyway, it's Wilson." Preston found himself smiling back, the expression feeling strange on his face after so long. "I suppose you're right about that." They walked back to the barn together, still hand in hand. Preston didn't stay much longer after that, but he made a point of bidding Lily a proper goodbye before he left. "Will I see you in town this week?" she asked. "Probably," Preston replied. "We'll need supplies." It wasn't much of a commitment, but it was something. A small step toward whatever lay ahead. As autumn deepened into winter, Preston found himself in town more frequently. Sometimes it was for legitimate errands, supplies for the ranch, materials for repairs, medicine for his father. Sometimes it was just to see Lily, though he rarely admitted this, even to himself. They fell into a pattern. Preston would arrive at the store near closing time, help Lily finish whatever tasks remained, and then walk her home in the gathering dusk. Sometimes they would talk about the town, about books Lily was reading, about the improvements Preston was making to the ranch. Sometimes they would walk in comfortable silence, simply existing in each other's company. Slowly, cautiously, Preston began to share bits of himself. Never the worst of his war experiences, but small things. How he missed the camaraderie of his unit, how he'd taught himself to play harmonica during long nights on watch. How he'd once saved a stray dog in a bombed-out village, only to have it follow him for 50 miles before finding a home with a local family. In return, Lily shared her own stories. The challenges of taking over the store after her father's death. Her dreams of expanding the business. The book of poetry she kept hidden under her mattress, filled with her own tentative verses. As winter settled over Montana, Preston found himself anticipating these conversations, planning what he might share next, wondering what new facet of Lily he might discover. It was a strange feeling, this looking forward instead of back, this gradual reawakening of interest in the future rather than entrapment in the past. December brought heavy snows and bitter cold. Preston worked tirelessly to ensure the ranch was prepared, the livestock sheltered, the woodpiles stacked high, the house sealed against drafts as best he could manage. Jeremiah's health declined with the temperature, his cough deepening, his movements becoming more labored. "You need to see Doctor Michaels," Preston insisted one evening after a particularly bad coughing spell had left his father weak and breathless. "Can't get to town in this weather," Jeremiah wheezed, gesturing toward the window where snow was falling in thick curtains. "I'll bring him here," Preston stated flatly, already reaching for his coat. "Don't be a fool, boy," Jeremiah protested. "You'll freeze to death out there." "I've survived worse," Preston replied grimly. Before his father could argue further, Preston was out the door, fighting his way through knee-deep snow to the barn. Eclipse was restless but steady as Preston saddled him, sensing the urgency in his master's movements. The ride to town was grueling. The wind cut through Preston's layers like a knife, and the snow made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. He kept Eclipse to the road by instinct and memory, trusting the horse's sure-footedness. Wilson was eerily quiet when they arrived, most residents wisely staying indoors. Preston made straight for Dr. Michael's house, pounding on the door until the sleepy-looking physician appeared. "Preston, what in God's name?" "It's my father," Preston interrupted. "His cough is worse. He can't catch his breath." Dr. Michaels didn't waste time with questions. "Let me get my bag." While the doctor gathered his supplies, Preston led Eclipse to the livery stable, arranging for him to be cared for until the storm passed. Then, spotting a light still burning in the general store, Preston made his way there. Lily answered his knock immediately, as if she'd been watching for someone. Her relief at seeing him was palpable. Preston, what are you doing out in this storm? Come in before you freeze. He stepped inside gratefully, the warmth of the store enveloping him. My father's ill. I came for Doctor Michaels. Concern creased Lily's brow. How bad is it? Bad enough that I rode through this. Preston gestured toward the window and the swirling snow beyond. You can't go back tonight, Lily said decisively. The storm's getting worse. Dr. Michaels will tell you the same. As if on cue, the doctor appeared at the store's entrance, snow covering his hat and shoulders. Ah, good, you're still here, he said when he spotted Preston. I was coming to find you. We'll have to wait until morning. This storm is turning into a full blizzard. Preston's jaw tightened. My father has survived many winters, Dr. Michaels finished firmly. One night won't make the difference, but you freezing to death might. We'll go at first light. You can stay here, Lily offered. I have a spare room above the store. Preston wanted to argue, to insist on returning to the ranch immediately, but even he could see the wisdom in waiting. The storm had intensified even in the short time since his arrival. To attempt the return journey now would be foolhardy at best, suicidal at worst. Thank you, he conceded finally. Dr. Michaels departed for his own home just down the street, promising to return at dawn. Lily locked the store and led Preston up the narrow staircase to the living quarters above. The apartment was small but tidy, with a main room that served as kitchen and parlor combined, and two doors leading off it that Preston assumed led to bedrooms. A fire crackled in a small stove, lending the space a cozy warmth. Let me take your coat, Lily said, and your boots. They need to dry by the fire. Preston complied, feeling oddly vulnerable in his stockinged feet. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room while Lily arranged his outdoor things near the stove. Are you hungry? She asked. I was about to have some soup when you knocked. Preston shook his head. Don't go to any trouble. Lily gave him a look. It's no trouble to feed a friend who's just ridden through a blizzard. Sit down, Preston, he obeyed, settling into a chair at the small table. Lily busied herself at the stove, ladling soup into bowls, slicing bread from a loaf on the counter. The domesticity of the scene struck Preston forcefully, this glimpse of a life so different from the one he'd been living, filled with small comforts and ordinary kindnesses. It's not much, Lily apologized as she set a steaming bowl before him. Just vegetable soup and day-old bread. It looks wonderful, Preston said honestly. The aroma alone was making his stomach growl, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since noon. They ate in companionable silence, the howling of the wind outside making the warmth of the room seem all the more precious. When they'd finished, Preston insisted on helping with the dishes, a task they completed side by side at the small wash basin. I'll show you to the spare room, Lily said when they were done. It's not much, but it's clean and warm. The room was indeed small, containing little more than a narrow bed, a nightstand, and a hook on the wall for clothing. But compared to some of the places Preston had slept during the war and his journey home, it was palatial. Thank you, Lily, he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway, for everything. She smiled, a soft, private smile that made something in Preston's chest ache with a longing he'd thought himself incapable of feeling anymore. Get some rest, she said. Tomorrow we'll be here soon enough. As Preston lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional creak of floorboards as Lily moved about her room, he found himself thinking of possibilities he hadn't dared consider before. Of a future that might include more than just survival and obligation. Of a life that might someday contain joy again. Dawn brought clear skies and a world transformed by snow. Preston and Dr. Michaels set out as soon as there was enough light to see by, following the main road where it was visible and breaking trail where it wasn't. The journey took twice as long as usual, but they reached the ranch by mid-morning. Jeremiah was worse. His breathing was labored, his complexion alarmingly gray. Dr. Michaels examined him thoroughly, his expression growing more grave by the minute. Pneumonia, he confirmed finally. And his heart is strained from fighting the infection. What can we do? Preston asked, standing rigidly by his father's bedside. Keep him warm. Help him sit up when the coughing is bad. There's medicine I can leave that might help ease his breathing. Dr. Michaels' tone was gentle but honest. But at his age, with his heart already weak, you should prepare yourself, Preston. Preston nodded stiffly. He'd seen enough death to recognize its approach. How long? Days, maybe a week. It depends on how strong his will to fight is. The doctor placed a hand on Preston's shoulder. I'll come back tomorrow if the weather holds. Send for me sooner if there's any change. After the doctor left, Preston pulled a chair to his father's bedside and sat, watching the labored rise and fall of Jeremiah's chest. The old man's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Preston's face. You look like hell, son, Jeremiah wheezed, an echo of his greeting when Preston had first returned. A humorless smile tugged at Preston's mouth. That seems to be a recurring theme with us. How bad? Jeremiah asked. Bad enough, Preston replied, not bothering to sugarcoat it. His father had never been one for comforting lies. Jeremiah nodded, accepting this. There are papers in my desk, deed to the ranch, will, everything's in order. Don't start that, Preston said sharply. You're not dead yet. No, but I'm headed that way, Jeremiah countered with surprising clarity. Need to say some things first. Preston wanted to argue, to insist that his father save his strength, but the determined look in Jeremiah's eyes stopped him. I'm listening, he said instead. I wasn't always a good father, Jeremiah began, each word clearly costing him effort. Too hard sometimes, too silent when I should have spoken. Your mother was the one who knew how to say what mattered. Preston swallowed hard. You did your best. Not always, Jeremiah admitted. But I tried, and I was always proud of you, even when I didn't say it. Especially when you went to war, I was scared for you but proud. Pa, Preston started, his throat tight. Let me finish, Jeremiah interrupted. Not much time for pretty speeches. He paused, gathering strength. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what you saw out there. Sorry it changed you, but you're still my son, still a good man. Preston looked away, unable to bear the sincerity in his father's gaze. You don't know what I did, what I became. I know enough, Jeremiah insisted. Known you your whole life. War changes a man, but it doesn't erase him. The boy I raised is still in there. Preston didn't argue, though doubt gnawed at him. He'd done things in the war that the boy his father had raised could never have imagined, let alone carried out. The ranch is yours now, Jeremiah continued after a moment. Do with it what you will, sell it if that's what you want. I won't sell it, Preston said immediately, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Jeremiah smiled faintly. Good, it's Zane land, has been for 30 years. He closed his eyes briefly, fatigue evident in every line of his face. One more thing, Lily Keller, Preston tensed. What about her? Don't be a fool, boy, Jeremiah said with a hint of his old gruffness. She loves you, always has. And you love her, though you're too stubborn or scared to admit it. It's not that simple, Preston protested. Never said it was simple, Jeremiah retorted. Said it was true. He reached out, his hand shaking with the effort, and grasped Preston's wrist. Don't waste time, son. It runs out faster than you think. Preston didn't know how to respond. The idea that Lily might love him still, despite everything, seemed both wonderful and terrifying. He wasn't the man she had fallen in love with years ago. He was something harder, colder, shaped by violence and loss. And yet, when he was with her, he could feel something of his old self stirring, like a plant long dormant beginning to reach for the sun. I'll think about it, he said finally. Do more than think, Jeremiah advised. Act while you still can. The old man drifted into a fitful sleep after that, leaving Preston alone with his thoughts and the weight of his father's words. Jeremiah Zane died 3 days later, slipping away peacefully in his sleep while Preston dozed in the chair beside him. It was a gentler death than many Preston had witnessed, but no less final, no less permanent in the void it left behind. The funeral was held 2 days after, the ground barely yielding to the gravediggers' shovels in the December cold. It seemed the entire town of Wilson turned out, standing solemnly in the cemetery as the minister spoke words of comfort that rang hollow in Preston's ears. He stood rigid and dry-eyed at the graveside, accepting condolences with nods and brief handshakes, saying little. Lily stood near him throughout, a quiet, steadfast presence. She had arrived at the ranch the morning after Jeremiah's death, taking charge of arrangements, preparing food, handling the 100 small details that grief made impossible for Preston to focus on. After the service, people gathered at the ranch house, bringing food and memories and awkward sympathy. Preston endured it, knowing it was expected, knowing his father would have wanted the community to be welcomed. But as the afternoon wore on, the press of people, the weight of their concern, became suffocating. Lily found him in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay, staring at nothing. "Everyone's starting to leave," she said softly, not coming too close. "I've put all the food away." "There's enough to last you a week at least." Preston nodded. "Thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me," Lily replied. "It's what friends do." "Is that what we are?" Preston asked, the question escaping before he could consider it. "Friends." Lily studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "We're whatever you need us to be, Preston. For now, friends seems like a good place to start." Preston looked away, ashamed of his bitterness, of the wall he'd built around himself that even Lily's patience and kindness couldn't fully penetrate. "I should be going too," Lily said when he didn't respond. "Unless there's anything else you need." What he needed was something he couldn't ask for, something he wasn't sure he deserved or could properly give in return, so he shook his head. "I'll be fine." Lily hesitated, then stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You know where to find me," she said simply, then turned and left. The ranch felt emptier than ever that night. Preston moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching his father's things, realizing that he was truly alone now. No family left. No ties binding him to Wilson except the land itself and Lily. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Don't waste time, son. It runs out faster than you think." The days after the funeral passed in a blur of necessary tasks. There was livestock to tend, repairs still to be made before the worst of winter set in, paperwork to handle regarding his father's estate. Preston threw himself into the work, pushing his body to exhaustion each day so that sleep would come quickly and hopefully without dreams. He avoided town, sending a farmhand from a neighboring property when supplies were needed. He wasn't ready to face Lily again, wasn't sure what he could offer her beyond his damaged self. Christmas came and went, marked only by a small package that arrived at the ranch, a new scarf knitted in blue wool that matched his eyes, accompanied by a simple note in Lily's flowing script. "Thinking of you, L." Preston wore the scarf when he worked outdoors, the soft wool a constant reminder of her presence even in his self-imposed isolation. January brought the harshest weather Montana had seen in years. Blizzard followed blizzard, the temperatures dropping so low that even the hardy cattle huddled together for warmth, their breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. Preston was checking the fences in the south pasture when the storm hit. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was filled with swirling snow so thick he could barely see his hand in front of his face. He turned toward home immediately, but the visibility was deteriorating by the second. Eclipse was sure-footed and knew the way, but even the best horse could become disoriented in a whiteout. Preston gave the animal his head, trusting him to find the path home, but after what seemed like hours of struggling through deepening snow, he realized they had missed the ranch house completely and were now in unfamiliar territory. The cold was becoming unbearable. Preston couldn't feel his feet anymore, and his hands were stiff despite his gloves. He knew the danger signs of hypothermia, had seen men die from exposure during winter campaigns. If he didn't find shelter soon, he would become another statistic, another frozen body to be discovered when the spring thaw came. Through the curtain of snow, he glimpsed a dark shape too regular to be natural, too solid to be a trick of the light. A building of some kind. Preston urged Eclipse toward it, hope giving him a surge of energy. As they drew closer, he recognized it as an old line shack, one of several scattered across the larger ranches in the area for use during roundups, or when bad weather caught cowboys far from home. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a small attached lean-to for horses, but to Preston, it looked like salvation. He dismounted with difficulty, his legs nearly buckling as they took his weight. Leading Eclipse into the lean-to, Preston secured him as best he could with numb fingers, then fought his way to the cabin door and pushed it open. The interior was dark and cold, but blessedly free from the howling wind. Preston fumbled with matches, managing to light a small oil lamp he found on a shelf. The weak flame illuminated a sparse but adequate shelter: a small stove, a narrow cot, a rough table and chair, and a stack of firewood. His movements mechanical from cold and training, Preston set about making a fire in the stove. It caught slowly, the wood damp from disuse, but eventually a small flame grew into a steady blaze. He checked on Eclipse, bringing in the saddle and his saddlebags, making sure the horse had what little shelter the lean-to provided. Only when these essential tasks were complete did Preston allow himself to collapse onto the cot, shivering violently as his body began to warm. He knew he should remove his wet outer clothing, but exhaustion claimed him before he could manage it. He dreamed of battlefields covered in snow, white turning to red wherever he stepped. Of men crying out for help he couldn't give. Of Lily, standing at a distance, reaching for him as he sank into a drift of blood-stained snow. Preston woke with a start, disoriented and sweating despite the cold. The fire had died down to embers and the lamp had gone out. Outside, the wind still howled, but with less ferocity than before. It was impossible to tell how long he had slept. Moving stiffly, Preston added wood to the stove and relit the lamp. His outer clothing had dried somewhat from the heat of the fire and his own body warmth. Still, he stripped off his damp coat and boots, hanging them closer to the stove to finish drying. A quick inventory of the lined shack revealed basic supplies: some canned beans, coffee, a small amount of salt pork, and a half-full bottle of whiskey left by previous occupants. Not a feast, but enough to sustain him until the storm passed. Preston forced himself to eat, though he had little appetite. The hot coffee revived him somewhat, and a cautious sip of the whiskey spread warmth through his chest. With nothing else to do but wait out the storm, Preston found his thoughts turning inexorably to Lily, to the patience with which she had accepted his distance after his return, to the quiet strength she had shown in the face of his coldness, to the hope that still lived in her eyes whenever she looked at him, despite everything. "You're still worth loving," she had said that night at the harvest dance. The words had haunted him ever since, a promise he wasn't sure he could believe or fulfill, but what if she was right? What if, despite everything he had done and seen, despite the darkness that lived inside him now, there was still something worth salvaging? Something worth offering to her. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Preston had spent so long believing himself beyond redemption, beyond the possibility of normal human connections, that the alternative seemed almost too much to hope for. And yet, here in this isolated cabin, with the storm raging outside and nothing but his own thoughts for company, Preston began to consider what it might mean to truly come home, not just to Wilson or to the ranch, but to himself. To the parts of himself that the war hadn't been able to destroy completely. The storm lasted 2 days, trapping Preston in the lined shack with dwindling supplies and increasing clarity about what he needed to do when he was finally able to leave. By the time the skies cleared, he had made his decision. It wasn't an easy one, and he wasn't sure he was ready for all it entailed. But as his father had said, time ran out faster than you thought. Preston had already wasted too much of it hiding from possibilities out of fear. The ride back to the ranch was slow and difficult through the deep snow, but Preston found it easily enough in the clear light of day. After seeing to Eclipse and checking that everything was in order, he hitched up the sleigh and headed toward town. Wilson was digging itself out from the blizzard, men shoveling paths between buildings, women hanging laundry to dry in the cold sunshine. Preston guided the sleigh down the main street, ignoring the curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing him in their midst, especially so soon after a storm. The general store was open, a path freshly cleared to its door. Preston tethered the sleigh's horses to the hitching post and took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. Inside, Lily was helping Mrs. Jenkins select fabric, her back to the door. She turned at the sound of the bell, her expression shifting from professional welcome to surprise to concern in the space of a heartbeat. "Preston, we were worried when the storm hit. Are you all right?" "I need to talk to you," Preston said without preamble, Privately, if you can spare the time." Lily glanced at Mrs. Jenkins, who was watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. "Of course. Mrs. Jenkins, would you excuse me for a moment? Feel free to look through the pattern books while you wait." She led Preston to the back of the store into the small office where she kept the accounts. "What is it?" she asked as soon as they were alone. "Has something happened?" "I got caught in the storm," Preston explained. "Spent 2 days in a lined shack waiting it out." Relief washed over Lily's face. "Thank God you found shelter. When no one had seen or heard from you, I feared the worst. You were worried about me?" Preston asked, though he knew the answer. "Of course I was," Lily replied, a hint of exasperation in her voice. "I care about you, Preston." "That hasn't changed." Preston really looked at her, taking in the sincerity in her blue eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the way she stood straight and unafraid before him despite his brusqueness. "I don't deserve it," he said softly. "You're caring. Not after the way I've kept you at arm's length, not after everything." "That's not for you to decide," Lily interrupted gently. "What I feel, who I care for, that's my choice. It always has been." Preston took a step closer to her. "When I was in that cabin with nothing but my own thoughts for company, I realized something. Or maybe I remembered something I'd forgotten." Lily waited, saying nothing, her eyes never leaving his face. "I remembered what it was like to want a future," Preston continued. "To see possibilities instead of just surviving from one day to the next." A small smile touched Lily's lips. "That sounds like progress." "It is," Preston agreed. "And it's because of you, your patience, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to give up on me even when I'd given up on myself." He reached for her hand, taking it carefully in his, marveling at how small and warm it felt in his calloused grip. "I can't promise to be the man I was before the war," he said honestly. "That man is gone, but I'm starting to think that maybe the man I am now, maybe he isn't beyond saving." "Beyond, loving." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but they were accompanied by a smile that lit her entire face. "I never thought he was," she said, squeezing his hand. "You're still worth loving, Preston Zane, you always have been." Preston's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I don't know if I remember how to do this properly," he admitted. "How to court a woman, how to open myself up again." "We'll figure it out together," Lily promised, "day by day." And then, because it seemed like the most natural thing in the world, Preston leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, the kiss of a man relearning the language of tenderness. But when Lily's arms came up around his neck, when she responded with a warmth and sweetness that made his heart stutter in his chest, Preston felt something within him shift and settle into place. It wasn't healing, exactly. The scars of war would always be part of him. But it was a beginning, a first step toward a life that might contain joy and love alongside the pain of memory. A life worth living, not just surviving. "Mrs. Jenkins is probably scandalized," Lily murmured against his lips, though she made no move to pull away. Preston glanced toward the front of the store where the older woman was pretending great interest in a bolt of calico while clearly straining to hear their conversation. "Let her be," he said. "Give the town something new to talk about." Lily laughed, the sound like music to Preston's ears. "They'll be talking about this for weeks." "Let them," Preston repeated, more serious now. "I want everyone to know that I'm courting Lily Keller properly, if she'll have me." "She will," Lily assured him, her eyes shining with happiness and a promise of future joy that, for the first time since his return, Preston allowed himself to believe in. The winter of 1867 gave way to the spring of 1868, and with the changing seasons came changes in Preston Zane as well. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but a gradual thawing, like the ice on the creek that ran through his property, breaking up piece by piece, until the water flowed freely once more. He still had nightmares. Still had days when the memories were too close, too raw, when he needed solitude to wrestle with the demons that the war had left inside him. But now, when those days came, Lily understood. She gave him space when he needed it, comfort when he could accept it, and unwavering belief in him always. Preston courted her with a deliberate care that touched Lily deeply. He brought her small gifts, the first wildflowers of spring, a book of poetry he'd ordered from Denver, a carving he'd made during the long winter evenings. He called on her regularly, taking her for drives in the countryside or simply sitting with her on the porch of the house behind the store that she called home. They talked about everything. Preston found, to his surprise, that sharing his war experiences with Lily didn't make them more painful, but less so. The burden of memory felt lighter when carried by two instead of one alone. "I killed men," he told her one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Not just in battle when it was them or me, but methodically, deliberately, I was a good shot. They made me a sniper." Lily listened without judgment as he described the hours of lying motionless, watching through a scope, waiting for the perfect moment to end a man's life with a single bullet. "The worst part," Preston admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "was that I was good at it. I didn't hesitate. Didn't feel anything when I pulled the trigger. It was just a job to be done." "You did what you had to do," Lily said softly. "What they trained you to do." Preston shook his head. "That's the thing, it wasn't training. It was something in me, some capacity for coldness that was already there." Lily took his hand, her touch grounding him in the present. "We all have darkness in us, Preston, all of us. The difference is in what we choose to do with it. You chose to use yours to protect your comrades, to serve a cause you believed in." "And now," Preston asked, "what do I do with it now that the war is over?" "Now you choose again," Lily said simply. "Every day, and I think you're choosing to build instead of destroy, to create a life instead of taking life away. That matters, Preston, that choice matters." It was moments like these that made Preston realize how deeply he had come to love her, not just for her beauty or her kindness, but for her wisdom, her strength, her ability to see him clearly and love him anyway. As spring turned to summer, Preston threw himself into revitalizing the ranch. With Jeremiah's careful savings and his own army pay, which he'd had little opportunity to spend during the war, Preston had enough capital to invest in improvements. He hired 2 hands to help with the heavier work, bought a small herd of quality cattle to begin rebuilding the Zane herd, and set about repairing the house and outbuildings that had fallen into disrepair. The physical labor was therapeutic, giving him purpose and direction. When the nightmares came, leaving him sleepless and haunted, he would channel his restless energy into work mending fences by moonlight, drafting plans for new corrals, carving furniture for the house that was gradually becoming a home again. Lily, meanwhile, continued to run the general store with increasing success. Her keen business sense and friendly manner made the store a centerpiece of Wilson's commercial life. As the railroad construction drew closer, bringing workers and new settlers to the area, her business thrived. They made an unconventional pair, the war-scarred rancher and the independent businesswoman. Wilson gossiped, of course, but mostly with approval. Preston had been one of their own before the war took him away, and his gradual reintegration into community life was seen as right and proper. Lily had always been respected for her practical intelligence and kind heart. That they should find happiness together seemed fitting to most. It was on a warm July evening, with fireflies dancing in the gathering dusk and the scent of fresh-cut hay hanging in the air, that Preston finally asked Lily to marry him. They were walking along the creek, as had become their custom after Sunday dinner at the ranch. "I've been thinking," Preston began, unusually hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," Lily teased, swinging their joined hands between them. Preston smiled, still marveling at how easily she could bring lightness to his spirit. "I've been thinking about the future, our future." Lily stopped walking, turning to face him. "What about it? I want there to be one," Preston said simply. "I want to build a life with you, Lily, if you'll have me. Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Zane?" Lily's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her emotion. Preston nodded, suddenly unable to find the eloquent words he'd rehearsed. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had this made in Helena," he said, opening it to reveal a ring of gold set with a small but perfect diamond. "It's not fancy, but it's beautiful," Lily interrupted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Not as beautiful as you," Preston said, finding his voice at last. "You brought me back to life, Lily. When I returned, I was a ghost walking among the living, cold, broken. But you saw something in me worth loving, worth saving. He took her hand, holding the ring poised at the tip of her finger. I'm not fully healed, I may never be. There will still be days when the past is too close, when I need solitude to fight my own battles. But I promise you this, I will love you with everything I have, everything I am, for as long as I live. Will you marry me? Lily's answer was in her eyes before she spoke it aloud. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Preston, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness that had grown between them over the months of careful courtship. When they finally parted, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. When? He asked. How soon can you be ready? Lily laughed, the sound like a bell in the summer evening. Eager are we? I've wasted too much time already, Preston replied, completely serious. I don't want to waste any more. They were married in September, when the aspens were turning gold and the first hint of autumn crispness touched the air. The ceremony was held in the Wilson Church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Lily wore a dress of ivory satin that she'd ordered from Denver, with late blooming wildflowers in her hair. Preston, at Lily's insistence, wore his uniform, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. It's part of who you are, she had told him when he protested. Not all of you, but a part. And I love all of you, Preston, the soldier, the rancher, the man. Standing before the minister, speaking vows that joined their lives officially as their hearts had already joined months before, Preston felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that he had never expected to experience again after the war. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was food and music and dancing, and if Preston still avoided crowds when possible, he made an exception for this day, this beginning. As the sun set and the festivities continued, Preston found himself standing slightly apart, watching Lily laugh with a group of women near the punch bowl. She caught his eye and smiled a private smile just for him before excusing herself and making her way to his side. Happy? She asked, slipping her arm through his. More than I thought possible, Preston admitted. Though I'm also thinking that these fine people have celebrated enough and should consider going home soon. Lily laughed, a blush coloring her cheeks. Patience, Mr. Zane. They'll leave when they're ready and not a moment before. That's the price of inviting all of Wilson to our wedding. Worth it, Preston decided, pressing a kiss to her temple. To see you so happy. And she was happy, radiant with it, in fact. The joy that had always been part of Lily's nature seemed magnified today, as if all the love she had carried faithfully through years of waiting was now allowed to shine forth unrestrained. It was late when the last guests finally departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in the house that Preston had worked so hard to restore over the summer. New curtains hung at the windows, selected by Lily. New furniture, much of it crafted by Preston's own hands, filled the rooms. Every corner had been cleaned, repaired, made ready for this new beginning. Welcome home, Mrs. Zane, Preston said softly as he carried Lily over the threshold, a tradition she had insisted upon. It's been home since you came back to it, Lily replied, her arms around his neck. Since you started to heal. Preston set her gently on her feet but didn't release her. I'm still healing, he acknowledged, but with you beside me I believe I can become the man you deserve. You already are, Lily assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. You always were. The years that followed were not without challenges. The nightmares never completely disappeared, though they came less frequently as time passed. There were still days when the weight of memory pressed too heavily on Preston, when he needed solitude to wrestle with his demons. But those days grew fewer, and the good days, the days of simple contentment, of quiet joy, of deep connection grew more numerous. The ranch thrived under Preston's careful management. The Zane herd became known for its quality, and Preston's innovative breeding practices were adopted by other ranchers in the area. Lily continued to run the general store successfully, gradually expanding its inventory to meet the growing needs of Wilson as the railroad brought increased commerce and new settlers to Montana. Their first child, a son they named Jeremiah Thomas after both their fathers, was born in the summer of 1870. Preston, who had feared that the violence he had witnessed and perpetrated might have rendered him incapable of gentleness, discovered to his wonder that fatherhood came naturally to him. He could hold his son with hands that had once taken lives, could sing lullabies in a voice that had once shouted commands in battle, could find peace in the simple act of rocking a child to sleep. "You're a natural," Lily told him one evening as she watched Preston carefully bathing their infant son. Preston looked up, his expression thoughtful. "It's strange," he admitted. "I thought this would be harder, that I wouldn't know how to be gentle anymore." "Gentleness was always in you," Lily said. "The war couldn't take that away, it was just buried for a while." Their family grew with the addition of twin daughters, Emma and Elizabeth, in 1873 and another son, William, in 1875. The house, once so empty and neglected, now rang with children's laughter and the everyday sounds of family life. Preston found himself increasingly involved in community affairs as well. At Lily's encouragement, he joined the town council, where his practical thinking and fair-mindedness made him a respected voice. When Wilson needed a new sheriff in 1876, it was Preston the town turned to, trusting his military experience and steady character. "Are you sure about this?" Lily asked when he told her of the offer. "Being sheriff won't be easy, there will be violence sometimes." Preston considered this carefully. "There will," he agreed, "but it will have purpose, protection, not destruction, I think. I think maybe this is what I'm meant to do with the skills the war gave me." Lily studied his face, then nodded. "If you believe it's right, then I support you, always." Preston served as sheriff for 6 years, bringing a steady hand and a reputation for absolute fairness to the role. Under his watch, Wilson became known as a town where the law was respected and justice was served without prejudice. When he finally stepped down to focus on the ranch and his growing family, the town honored him with a ceremony that left him uncomfortable with the attention, but deeply moved by the community's respect. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, Lily remained his anchor, his compass, his heart. Her belief in him never wavered, even on the darkest days when his faith in himself faltered. Her love, steady and true, was the constant that everything else in his life revolved around. On their 20th anniversary, Preston took Lily back to the creek where he had proposed, where they had walked and talked during their courtship. The children, now old enough to manage without them for a day, stayed behind at the ranch, promising to complete their chores and not squabble too much in their parents' absence. "It hasn't changed much," Lily observed as they walked along the familiar path, her hand in his as it had been countless times before. "Unlike us," Preston said, glancing down at her with a smile. Silver threaded through Lily's once golden hair now, and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes and mouth, the traces of years of laughter and occasional tears. "We've changed for the better," Lily decided, returning his smile. "Both of us." They reached a bend in the creek where a large, flat rock offered a natural place to rest. Preston spread a blanket over it, then helped Lily settle herself before sitting beside her. From his pocket, he produced a small box. "Another ring?" Lily asked, her eyes twinkling. The simple gold band with its modest diamond still adorned her left hand, never removed in all their years together. "Not exactly," Preston replied. He opened the box to reveal a locket of finely wrought gold. "Open it." Lily did, her breath catching as she saw what was inside, a miniature portrait of their family, painted by a traveling artist who had passed through Wilson the previous summer. Preston and Lily in the center, surrounded by their 4 children, all dressed in their Sunday best. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, tracing the tiny faces with her fingertip. "I had it made in Helena," Preston explained, "to remind you of what you've given me, a family, a home, a life worth living." Lily looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We gave these things to each other, Preston." Preston shook his head, taking her hands in his. "No, Lily, you gave them to me first. When I came back from the war, I was a ghost, empty, cold, broken in ways I didn't even fully understand. I didn't believe I deserved happiness or peace or love. But you did. You took my hand and told me I was still worth loving, and somehow, miracle of miracles, you made me believe it. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers as he had done so many times over the years. Everything I am, everything we've built together, it started with your faith in me when I had none in myself. Lily reached up to cup his face in her hands, her touch as gentle and sure as it had been when they were young. And I would do it all again, she said softly. Every moment, every day. I would choose you again and again, Preston Zane. They sat together as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the creek and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. 20 years had passed since Preston had returned from war, cold and broken and certain that nothing good remained for him in this world. 20 years of healing, of building, of loving. Of finding, day by day, that life could be rich and full and meaningful again. The nightmares still came occasionally. The memories would never completely fade. But Preston had learned that brokenness was not the end of the story, that healing, while imperfect, was possible. That love, patient and enduring, could redeem even the darkest parts of a man's soul. And as he sat with Lily beside the creek that had witnessed so much of their journey together, Preston felt a sense of gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. For this woman who had seen worth in him when he could see none in himself. For the family they had created together. For second chances and new beginnings, and the infinite possibilities that lay in the simple words she had spoken to him all those years ago. You're still worth loving.